like a lot of other people, I've been playing a lot of Tears of the Kingdom. The new Zelda game is, bar none, one of my favorite games I've ever played in my life. We all thought Tears of the Kingdom was, at the very least, going to be on par with Breath of the Wild in terms of quality and immersion. But honestly, I think I speak for a lot of people when I say this. Tears of the Kingdom is Game of the Year 2023, bar none. There simply isn't a game that's projected to release this year that is going to break as much ground and make as many waves in the community as Tears of the Kingdom did. The amount of things that Tears of the Kingdom fixed and improved upon in Breath of the Wild that we hadn't even realized were problematic is unprecedented when we talk about sequels for action-adventure open world games. Now, if you're anything like me when you were playing through Breath of the Wild, and even in hindsight, there were a massive amount of issues that you genuinely forgot about over time, due to the game being so incredibly immersive and trial and error friendly throughout the playthrough. Now, I honestly do have a pretty extensive mental list and note of things that I was experiencing while I was playing through Tears of the Kingdom that I didn't even realize were problems in Breath of the Wild until they were fixed in the sequel. To tackle the Mount Everest-like task of listing every single thing I picked up on during my playthrough of Tears of the Kingdom that I thought was an improvement from Breath of the Wild is its own video. But the following few points and things that I'm going to bring up are some of the biggest improvements that I picked up on, and also personally just some of my favorite that I think make the game that much more accessible to the average player than Breath of the Wild was. So who else remembers in Breath of the Wild when you would go to pick up a new weapon, or you would get a new weapon in a chest, and you would get the message, you can't carry any more of those, or you can't carry any more melee weapons. You then would have to watch the animation of you either dropping the weapon back down or watching the chest close again, which would require the player to open their inventory and drop or clear out a weapon or item slot in order for them to pick the item back up. This felt extremely clunky, and understandably this was one of the first fixes I noticed while playing through Tears of the Kingdom. It was incredibly satisfying after 6 years of dealing with this playing Breath of the Wild to see within the first 10 minutes of gameplay that it's one of the biggest fixes. Right off the bat, this showed me that Nintendo used the 5 years of development time that it took to get this game out to us. Nintendo and the development team behind Zelda really listened to the feedback given by players with Breath of the Wild. The fixes shown in this game are absolutely indicative of them listening to every single complaint and review that the game received on release and years to come. The game also has incredibly noticeable increases in performance in really stress-tested areas in Breath of the Wild. For example, in Korok Forest and Tears of the Kingdom, you get very little to no frame dips in the busiest area. In Breath of the Wild, this was the benchmark for stress testing the game, and people use this when trying to show examples of the game dropping in FPS. There was also a pretty moderate rebalance of stamina in the game. For example, in this game, when you draw your bow, it only draws stamina after you shoot the bow, giving you an unlimited amount of time, other than you in the ground, to aim your shot. In Breath of the Wild, this wasn't the case. It would just gradually drain your stamina until you were either out or took your shot, making it feel like you were rushed and maybe messing your shot up. And they also rebalanced stamina for the rest of the actions in game, like climbing and swimming, which makes it a little bit less tedious and clunky than the first game. On the same side of the coin, but also on a tangent, one thing that really messed with me was not being able to climb on icy surfaces in Tears of the Kingdom. This is a small gripe. Why I'm upset about it is it doesn't add a thing to the world other than making it a little bit more complicated to traverse vertical surfaces if they so happen to have frozen water on them. Ultimately, this may add to the realism for some people, but I think it was just something that some bored developer implemented into the game on the day that it was his turn to work on the game. The next thing that I'm going to talk about, and that everybody is thinking the same thing about, is that the makeshift vehicles in Breath of the Wild that a bunch of people like speedrunners and people who just like to break the game use were replaced entirely by vehicles that you can craft yourself with materials you find around the world, zonite devices that you can store in your inventory and use at any time via the Ultrahand ability. Not only can you create vehicles that help you more easily traverse the overworld, you can create mechs out of materials you find around you, you can create literal weapons of war, you can also use these abilities to solve shrine puzzles, obviously. But what's really cool is the freedom that these puzzles and the shrines allow for. If you can think of the solution and it works in your head, it most likely will work in Tears of the Kingdom. And I think the reason for this is because of how realistic the physics engine can be in this game. If you're looking at something and you test it out and you pick it up with Ultrahand and you rub it and bash it against certain things, you realize that it behaves in the game like you would expect it to, like a real life object with the laws of Earth would behave. This creates the possibility that you could just be looking at the shrine, looking at the puzzle, not even attempting to solve it, and you can solve it in your head and it'll click and it'll make sense and you're like, wait, that might work. And lo and behold, it's a solution. And Ultrahand is pretty much a direct upgrade from magnesis in Breath of the Wild, but instead the object doesn't have to be magnetic in order for you to interact with it. So I've just sung Tears of the Kingdom's praises for the last 5 minutes, and I haven't even touched on the amazingly compelling story that it offered. It's a very immersive and cinematic approach to world building that we saw a little bit of in Breath of the Wild. However, the story and cinematics in Breath of the Wild are trumped in comparison to the ones that we see in Tears of the Kingdom. The voice acting, the camera angles, the pauses in dialogue, everything in these cinematics, without giving any spoilers, hooks you in to a level that you really can't pull yourself out of until the screen fades black and you realize you're back to gameplay. There are plot twists and turns of events that are completely unexpected, and quite frankly, we haven't seen in a Zelda game in a very long time when we're talking in terms of darkness, rawness, and just how much shock value there can be in these cutscenes. Experiencing Tears of the Kingdom blindly without any spoilers is something that I not only recommend, but I think is an absolute necessity in order to experience the full emotion that these cutscenes are trying to evoke in you. I'm telling you what, there were some things that happened throughout the story that had me more shocked than when I first found out that the Zelda in Breath of the Wild was a British schoolgirl. Tears of the Kingdom offers a level of freedom not mimicked by many other open world adventure games. If you see an object that you think you can interact with, you most likely can in some way. If you have an idea to build a really complex machine with Ultrahand and a bunch of stuff you find around you, you can probably do that too. If there's a large area where you need to vertically ascend a cliff somewhere, if there's a piece of it sticking out and you're far enough below, or at least close enough below, you'll be able to use the ascend ability to instantly go through the bottom of that platform and appear at the top, wasting no stamina and very little time. Now on paper, the ascend ability sounds a little bit broken if you think about it. In order to combat the brokenness of this ability, you can only move a certain amount of distance vertically between you and the object you're trying to ascend through. And depending on the length of the object that you're ascending through, this ability can actually give you quite a long cutscene, up to 10 or 15 seconds if you go through a long enough area. Now if you accidentally ascend in an area that you didn't want to, you have to fully watch the cutscene of you going up through it, swimming through the solid ground, realize you're at the wrong spot, and then watch yourself dip back down in reverse the same amount of time it took to get up there. This is realistic, but not fun to sit through. With the new and improved abilities, as well as the creative freedom that this game offers you, it honestly makes Breath of the Wild look like a tech demo, giving us a little bit of a taste of what was to come with Tears of the Kingdom. I mean, think of everything that you thought was perfect about Breath of the Wild, and imagine that it somehow got improved. If you haven't played Tears of the Kingdom, this is what you're in for. This is what you're going to experience the first time you play this game through. The shrines in Tears of the Kingdom are incredibly creative, and thus allow for multiple solutions to be utilized. This could hinder or even halt the scenario, theoretically, where some young kid gets stuck in a single shrine puzzle, and possibly getting confused or frustrated and dropping the game, either for a little while or forever. This creative freedom also leaks into the bosses and over and underworld traversal. In the trailers and everything that they were leading up to with Tears of the Kingdom, Nintendo and the development team behind Tears of the Kingdom neglected to mention anything about the underworld or the depths area in the game. Honestly, their focus during the trailers and showcases of the gameplay were about the Sky Islands. In my assumption, this allowed for most players who even kept up with the trailers and news about Tears of the Kingdom to experience the depths for their first time, not knowing that they were even there. I know personally, my first experience in the depths was finding a chasm and realizing that it looked a lot like the gloom that was around the overworld. Looking down into the chasm though, I realized that it seemed endless and that I was going to dive into a loading zone into a new area, or that it was an area implemented to make new players just die out of curiosity. Now the latter is something that you don't see a lot implemented in Nintendo games, the new player trap that'll lure players in out of curiosity just to kill them and teach them a lesson. Now this common beginner's trap that you see in other video games isn't really something you see in Nintendo games all that often, and when you do, it's usually lighthearted and played off as a joke. But do not mistake my words, the depths are no joke in Tears of the Kingdom. It's something that you need to be careful about the minute you enter, because there are things that can make your overall hearts go down, meaning you have a lower capacity for the maximum amount of damage that you can take, and they only get healed when you go back up to the surface or find a light route, which is something that dispels the darkness in the area and allows you to see down in the depths much better. This is an extremely annoying debuff, and it makes you so cautious of ever stepping in the gloom for too long. Despite all of these annoyances that are really just nitpicks of mine, the depths is absolutely amazing. You're flip-flopping between emotions of, oh my goodness, this is so cool, I cannot believe that they implemented this in the game, to, oh my goodness, I'm gonna die. This thing's gonna kill me. This thing chasing me with the weird music, it's gonna kill me, I'm dead. My blood pressure when I first was jump scared by a frox in the dark spiked higher than Snoop Dogg on 420. It was up there. A small complaint that I have about the depths is the lack of enemy diversity compared to the overworld. Sure, you have your new enemies like the Frogs, but there's also older enemies like Bokoblins and Moblins and Lizalfos from the overworld that down in the depths behave the exact same way. They just have altered sound effects and have a gloomy malice glow or hue to them, almost leaking off of their bodies, to indicate that they are a little bit different. Something's wrong with them down here in the depths. However, it is these subtle details that you see that are kind of touches of love. Attention to detail like this isn't really seen in many video games. This game had a 5-year development cycle that we know of. The amount of time put in and small details that were integrated into the game really just shows how much they cared that this game needed to be at least a little bit better than Breath of the Wild. And personally, I think they blew that expectation for themselves out of the water. Now I, as well as many other fans, once we saw that Tears of the Kingdom was revealed, had a realization that Nintendo and the development team had massively large shoes to fill in the shadow of Breath of the Wild's success. How they were going to attempt to do this was a mystery until the game was released. And honestly, I don't think anybody expected the game to blow Breath of the Wild out of the water like it did. I mean, it took Breath of the Wild, a seemingly perfect game that got 10s out of 10s and won Game of the Year and is regularly regarded as the best Zelda game ever released, as well as a contender for one of the best video games of all time, and dissected everything that was being said about it by critics, because in my eyes, this honestly is the only way to improve a game that has so little room for improvement in the first place. You listen to the people who play it religiously, who also, in turn, find out the most bugs, things that bother them, and the consistency of them playing them and experiencing these things that are inconvenient will ultimately shine through in the reviews and the things that they say about the game in hindsight. Overall, I think it's safe to say that Tears of the Kingdom set an unprecedented bar for open world adventure games and is one of the most important games to ever be released. This game showed the capability and potential for improvement in areas that we really needed to dig to find errors in. It also shows what dedication and passion can do in a project when people actually listen to people that are giving feedback on something that is as incredibly important and profitable as the Legend of Zelda series. Any flagship title from any video game franchise is that important. If a company or franchise puts out a flagship game, even a movie, that flops terribly and is known as a buggy, glitchy, unenjoyable mess, that could possibly hinder and halt the sales and success of the franchise for the rest of its future. So not only did Nintendo and the development team behind Legend of Zelda know this, they excruciatingly did work on this game to avoid the possibility of that even happening. And within that realm of expectation, they crapped out the golden gem that is The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. Thank you for watching.